All right. Last time was a really good conversation, I'd say, for the vast majority of it. I guess I'll apologize for being heated because I do get kind of upset, and I'm trying to like work on it and stuff like that. But passion is like because I like have things I want to say and I want to be able to say them well, and then sometimes when I say it, even it comes out like a little bit more intense than I meant. So if I ever frustrated you with my tone, or if I ever frustrated you with just my lack of listening to you, I am sorry, and I genuinely am sorry. But I am still grateful that you're doing this with me.
Sure, I appreciate that.
Yeah. And this time, I think we got to keep it at an hour because I actually do have to do some school stuff after. But
Okay, great.
awesome, yeah. Even
I
as
read
much
that
as I
book, by the way.
did, you really did you like it?
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, it was as a piece of fiction goes, it was definitely interesting in terms of how he lays out the story and that sort of thing. I mean,
Right.
as far as a kind of an overview of Western philosophy, it's an interesting way to put it, and I've
Mm-hmm.
definitely nothing that hasn't been discussed in different formats. So
Oh,
I was just
absolutely.
curious why you're so passionate about the book. What do you like about the book that you
Well, for
suggest others read it for?
Well, for because of how large the topics are, um, and how unspecialized everyone is, who virtually everyone is who talks about them, getting in any depth at all feels like you're just drowning in this unimaginably stormy sea. You know, there's just so much to actually think about, and so much ramifications of the thoughts that you actually do land on, or like anything solid that you come across doesn't feel as that solid. That you end up feeling like the character of Phaedrus that's a fictional character in that book, where you feel like a conspiracy theorist almost, where like you have a lot of information and you know a lot of it's true, but it's really difficult to accurately paint a picture that doesn't sound crazy. You see what I'm saying? It's like someone with no teacher jumping into Christianity and then trying to and saying that they understand the whole thing. Christianity is a long, complicated history, and there's a lot more than just one reason why someone believes it. So yeah, that's basically it. I liked it because it was a good breakdown for me of philosophical concepts that are way beyond what I understand at the moment.
Okay.
And also, it was also kind of interesting and fun just with the relationship with his son, which is something that's an archetypal story, you know, father and son relationships.
Yeah.
One of the central ones of
I was
Christianity,
just
actually.
curious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
Um,
just curious why you're so passionate about it. That's all.
I one of the and the other reason is just that I heard it was a good book and I read it and I liked it,
Okay.
and one of
Okay.
the and I was kind of using it as kind of like a way to get over some fears of mine, like public speaking and talking to other people in that sort of way, and like uh, trying to, like how like you're supposed to face your fears. One of the things that I'm most afraid of is conversation in general about anything serious. It's like I'm afraid of how the person is going to interpret what I said, and I'm
hmm
terrified of it being interpreted falsely. And one of the things that does is it makes the communication process really difficult, and especially for me, I get hung up on that a lot, and then I end up receding from friend groups and public scrutiny, and just kind of like end up being stuck in this little bubble at home. And I don't want to be stuck in that bubble at home. I kind of want to expand my horizons. So I was using it as a way to practice public speaking on
What
YouTube.
part in that do you think it was good for? I can understand it,
Mm-hmm.
other things, but I didn't catch what it would be useful for from a public speaking perspective.
Oh, I'm reading it out loud and posting that to YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's I'm also enjoying it for that reason, because it's a much different experience to read a book that you don't know of, that you don't know,
Uh-huh.
you haven't read before, and to read it out loud for the first time. It's a much different process of understanding it.
Okay.
Yeah, um, yeah. I like the story as a basic level, and I like that he's trying to grapple with large concepts and try to also at the same time have a relationship with his son, which is strained by his focus on those large concepts, but it's also necessary for. I believe it's necessary for a father to, in some way, share his religion with his family. I think that's necessary and expected. In the same way, mother too. But and this is a book about a father, so yeah.
Hmm.
Would you agree with that?
About what?
That a father, it's part of like the fatherhood to share religion or share philosophical beliefs with children.
Well, I mean, it's just the nature of families that, families uh, share common beliefs. I mean, people instill in their children the values that they find are important. That's just true universally.
Right. Yeah. I think that I guess the the process of doing that seems to be a little bit undefined, at least in the Christian community. It doesn't exactly say how you're supposed to do that, which is I think is generally a good thing, but it does leave a lot of people wanting more from that is at least in my case wanting more of that sort of relationship with my parents or even just my father, on a spiritual level, which I feel like I got basically net zero of.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of talk today about looking back and only the negatives of
Yeah,
our parents, and it's pretty common um, to reinforce that through the kinds of conversations we have with our peers. And I think as you get older, you'll realize that people do the best they can, and it's
yeah,
easy to criticize in the rearview mirror or to overemphasize
yeah,
things that you think they should have done better.
yeah, yeah. Um,
My father left us when we were when I was 15 years old. And so,
mm,
I've chosen um, to love the father I have rather than imagine a father that I should have had. So, you make choices in life
yeah,
about what kind of life you want to live and what kind of relationship you want to have with your family.
yeah. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm glad that I'm glad that you made that decision. That does, from my perspective, seem like the right choice. Yeah. Um, I think that what I've been trying to do recently is I recognize and still recognize the lack of relationship that I have with my father, not for the same reason as you have, and I'm in however you want to interpret it, I'm blessed in my own right. I had a father my whole life, and I am thankful for that. Regardless of how close I feel I am to him, I still had one. So I am grateful for that, and thank you for sharing that with me. Um, I guess what I'm trying to say is I recognize that didn't have a relationship with him, so in my outreach and in my um, kind of frustrated position where I was like having so many like mental issues in my head, trying to wrap my mind around the basis for how I should structure my own reality. In my head, I did reach out to him, and I was shunned away from even having
Hmm.
any conversation at all about it. And I don't want to be too emotional about it because I'm not great with that, but and I don't want to like in no way am I blaming my father for my own withdrawing from Christianity, but I am suggesting that probably the right answer as a father in that situation, regardless of I mean I'll hear your thoughts on it, but probably the right answer for as a father is to have the conversation even if it doesn't um, end with your child going back to Christianity. It does feel like the right answer is to at least allow for that conversation to be had.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have no insight into it, so I can't judge one way or the
Right.
other in terms of what you mean by have the conversation. In terms of what we might have certain expectations as to the kinds of conversations people are willing to have and that sort of thing. And at the end of the day, it's there's a certain point at which I made a decision with my own father that there was a certain thing that I wasn't going to demand of him, even though I could have demanded it of him. And so it's what it's what I chose in order to have a relationship with him, and that's just what it is. I mean, the reality is that we all have relationships with our Father. I think a lot of us, especially nowadays in a therapeutic age, imagine the kinds of fathers they should have been instead of the fathers or the parents that we have. And as I said, there's people that have a lot worse,
Yeah.
and so it's just a matter of what we decide to do with that information, and whom we decide to punish with that information.
Right. Um, I think because we as people can kind of recognize when something isn't as good as it could be, that kind of puts on our plate the actual reality that does seem to be true, that if we want it bad enough, we can facilitate it's coming, it's happening. If I see that something is possible, then I can achieve that goal. If I see that I have a strained relationship with my father, I can attempt as best as I can, even if I fail, but I can attempt to obtain that better reality. And that is
Sure,
what I was doing. Right.
you can do as much as you can. I mean, that's the
Hmm.
point, though. You can only be responsible for your own thoughts and your own words, and so
Correct.
you can't uh, force other people to be the kind of person that you wish they were, or imagine that they should
Hmm.
have been. You have to deal with the reality as it is.
And that's true. And one of the things that I do think is universal, though, is that I can ask people questions about what they believe, and they can refuse to answer. But also, I if someone asks you what you believe, and one of the fundamental foundations of your belief system is the sharing of that belief, I would have expected that my father would have at least had the conversation with me about what he believes,
Yeah, I mean,
instead of
if it
answering
took
that he doesn't want to think about hypotheticals and then walking out on it.
Yeah. Well, all I'm saying is like if the what you believe took the shape of the way that you were interrogating me last time, I can imagine that a lot of people wouldn't
It
want to
didn't.
have a you know what amounts to more than a conversation, but really kind of an agenda for trying to corner somebody into a place where they can be ridiculed for what they believe.
Yeah. It's a lot easier to pick apart someone else's belief than provide your own and then have that picked apart. And I recognize that.
Sure. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
one of the things that I do need to do more of is provide more of my own explanation for things, and then allow that to be picked apart. That way, it's less of me picking apart someone else's uh, position, and then acting, not acting, but and then somehow feeling like I'm doing something good, when a lot of the times it has to be a give and take, and I'm not giving as much as I could be in those situations sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, or at the very least, or at the very least, be honest at the beginning of the conversation and say, "Hey,
Mm-hmm.
my intent here is to have a debate on, you know, theodicy in terms of justifying evil in a world, or
Mm-hmm.
why Christian. Let's have a conversation as to why about this particular topic, and then you prepare the person rather than simply saying, "Hey, I just want to have a conversation." When it becomes apparent through the midst of the conversation that there was an agenda to begin with, that you end up shifting along the way. And so some of the reaction tends to be that, well, I thought we were having a conversation, but it's pretty apparent that under the surface, uh, the questions are being directed to kind of lead me. It's sort of leading the witness in a certain direction.
Yeah.
And in a conversation, you typically don't lead somebody. You want to have a give and take, and at least say what is the purpose for, or what's the agenda behind these questions. So I'm willing to go anywhere with respect to certain topics, but I just need to know
Mm-hmm.
what the whole point of it is, rather than kind of camping out on a particular. That's why last time, what was frustrating for me is getting stuck on things when I could have said, well, let's just deal with, for instance, um, why do you believe in a young Earth when it seems like all the evidence is an old Earth?
Mm-hmm.
And how can you maintain a commitment to the fidelity of the scriptures in that situation? And instead, we get wrapped around the axle on, the, how carbon dating works or something like that. And so,
Yeah, I
it
did look
just,
that up.
it detracts from the actual conversation.
Yeah, I did look that up. I obviously I was talking out of my booty during the conversation, but uh, it clearly it's accurate. 60,000 years is the short research that I did. So, although it's anything more than that, I was clearly not knowing what I was talking about. And even the accuracy of the 60,000 years could be off, but it's that's the window that the scientists who have done the research that I have not have said that they are accurate to. But at least the general consensus is that. I don't know if you agree with that,
Okay.
but that is the small
I
research that
mean,
I did.
I just don't want to go down that thing. I mean, the
Sure. Yeah, we
radioactive
can.
half-life of carbon 14 is about 5,280 years. So, I
Hmm.
mean, when the point is that if you're going to establish something for billions of years, you wouldn't even use carbon 14 for that, because
Yeah.
there would be no discernible trace of that after billions of years in that,
Right.
because it decays to carbon 12.
Right. Yeah. The radiometric metric dating that I was also looking up said was talking about rocks because of the kind of churning of the Earth and kind of how the older rocks get pulled to the surface. You can actually find rocks that are about 5.5 billion years old. So that are dated using like you can date like zirconium. That's that old. That's about as old as we can find
Hmm.
find as far as that goes. So I
Yeah,
guess that
given
would
the
be
assumptions that scientists are using to establish the
yeah.
date.
Yeah, and that was an interesting. I don't know if so much that's I guess I guess you could say that the rate of decay is an assumption,
No,
but
it's
I
not a
don't.
rate of decay issue. It's a rate of proportion. It's
Oh,
a
okay,
initial proportion issue.
fair
It's
enough.
like
Yeah.
you would have to have been there 5 billion years ago to say, yes, this is when it started. This was the
Hmm.
proportion of the particular isotope in there. And I'm not, the point is that you can't, you can make those assumptions, and they're
Hmm.
not invalid. They're not necessarily invalid assumptions to make, but the only point is that, um, you know, uh, those who would say that say, well, if you're going to create something, it's going to be with some apparent age, like for instance, a full grown man and that sort of thing. So,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I don't really, those kinds of conversations don't really bother me or
Mm-hmm.
phase me, to kind of deal with the scientific data as it is, just because, none of us are there, and there are larger, philosophical or origin, or, like, I guess if you want to say, um, causal issues to say that, um, uh, the something rather than nothing, and that sort of thing. So the point is that there are other philosophical and theological reasons why I'm convicted that, I'm not there, and I wasn't there, and so
Mm-hmm.
whatever it says, I'm not gonna, it's not something, a hill I'm gonna die on, but
Right.
the there's no reason to doubt it either.
Well, I suppose there are reasons to doubt it, only because the fantastical elements of the Bible, that
The
a
what?
lot of the more fantastical elements of the Bible, not in its entirety, but in specific points, do seem to be
Well,
a little
yeah, but I
bit
mean,
less believable than others.
nothing's fantastical once you understand that there's a creator of all things. I mean, the fact that once you accept the fact that there's a creator of the heavens and the earth, anything in the scriptures that attends to the power of that God is
Mm.
not fantastical. Now, if
Is
you
is
assume that everything is, a psychological projection of what man says,
mhm.
and the only thing that we know are things that we can physically measure and that sort of thing, and that every thing about this is just mythical, then sure, it sounds fantastical. But
Mm.
that's just a pattern of somebody with, saying, well, none of that can happen anyway, and so it's fantastical.
I I suppose I suppose what they're saying is that it's not that none of that can happen. It's that as far as the evidence that we've can accumulate today, everything, all of that, none of that suggests that the more fantastical elements in the Bible could have happened because of
Right. And
what we
that's
know
the
that can
point,
happen
is that
today.
the evidence that they had at the time that it happened indicated that it wouldn't happen either. That's not the point. It's like, I think people assume that these things happened all the time, and that people in the ancient Near East were just like used to these things happening and saying, "Oh,
Mhm.
that stuff happens all the time. Of
Right.
course that is going to occur." The whole point is that these things are extraordinary,
Right.
and they realized them as such back then.
Well, I guess one of the more interesting points that I've heard that I actually do think is a good point, and I'm happy to hear what you have to say about it, is um, if we're talking about an all powerful being, could it have been that uh, the beginning of life was started and he allowed for it to progress as the evolutionists would claim, and get to the point where man is created, and then gave his word to them?
You mean like in terms of natural,
Well,
in
in
terms
that
of
in
that
this.
God, yeah, let's say that let's just use, because for me, to me, the whole idea of just of kind of treating God as an object of philosophical uh, speculation, given what I believe of him, is like not even in my worldview. So I can understand how, if you want to talk about in theory, you've got to at least inhabit something, right? You got to inhabit like a conviction at some point, and I understand what your conviction is. But let's just say, is it possible that that what God did was that he set in motion all of the forces? And some use a day age theory to say that there's a gap between Genesis 1 and 2, and so there's an age that is kind of implied there where evolution could have occurred. And there's plenty of Christians that believe that. I personally don't buy it, um, just because on the status of, because I believe in divine revelation
Mhm.
and I believe in God, can't exegetically support that particular thing. So I generally, as for the most part, I leave issues of how those things came to pass, just, I don't really, they're really almost immaterial to me, just because,
Right.
at the end of the day, the usefulness of the thing in terms of how we leverage science, in terms of how we understand how to, use the laws that exist in the universe, they don't really impact anything other than, being interesting foils for certain conversations.
Yeah. I guess. I guess if for a person that likes to build it up using strictly evidence, would that be? Is it not like understandable why people don't just take the Bible as a
I mean, and what you're saying is that you're not strictly taking evidence. You're taking certain things and saying, well,
mm-hmm.
this couldn't be the case, and so since I rule out, if I rule out a creator to begin with, then what
Right.
evidence are you taking? It's not as if you're taking some sort of evidence that you have from even before your lifetime, or
Mm-hmm.
even before the lifetimes of scientists, when we started to be able to measure certain things. We're looking backward, we're looking at certain phenomena as they are today. And in fact, there's a lot of faith that goes into evolutionary processes, just on the very basis of some of the things that we've discovered, even within the last 50 years, about the nature of DNA, and the difficulty, or the fact that whole bodies, whole body plants, in terms of basic organisms, have to have had DNA code in them. And all they scientists still can't understand the mechanism by which it was even possible to um, to sustain a theory of evolution by which the idea of simple organisms becoming more complex organisms. And so I know that they've got all sorts of theories, including some people that believe, well, maybe alien life seeded the DNA in order to be able to do that. But the point is that there's plenty of gaps in there, and people have their theories to say, well, we know it couldn't have been God, and so we've got all of these, processes by which we are certain in our minds, theories in our minds, that we can explain how it is that we're having this conversation that amounts from an atom in a star eventually becoming the basis for two minds having a conversation. But those are all sorts of gaps that involve certain faith commitments that have no other evidence in terms of an ability to sustain the conviction because there's no mechanism to explain it.
Right. I suppose that this is one of those instances of it's kind of easy to poke holes in someone else's theory, and this is not a critique of you as an individual, nor is it a critique of Christians and how they operate. It's just it is kind of easy to say, well, that doesn't seem absolute, and what I have here does seem to be absolute. So I'm going to take what I have and kind of keep going with my life, and I
No,
respect
it's
that
that
because
what
that
it
does.
has nothing to do. Well, in part it is. I mean, in part it's
Right.
both. I mean,
Yeah,
in part
that's what kind of what.
the issue between you and me isn't whether or not we have a conviction about a particular worldview and that guides in terms of how we say it. I mean, I have evidence that you know that you know whether or not people accept it. There's internal evidences of the reality of God, and as well as other kinds of things that have happened that involve eyewitnesses and all sorts of other things. And other
Do
people will be skeptical of them because they say, well, you know, they're biased sources, but where are you going to, what are you going to go by? But at the end of the day, the same conviction is guiding you to decide which evidences and which things you believe are valid. And at the end of the day, all we can measure is internal coherence and workability in terms of
right.
how we apply it in life.
Do you think that that people have internal evidences for as reasons for why you God could not exist?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think mankind is generally hostile to God and they're at natural enmity with him because of the fall. So yeah, I buy
Interesting.
into that all the time. It's right in scripture that that's the case. In
Um,
fact, the fallenness of man is actually the most empirically verifiable fact about human nature. Everybody tries to come up with some reason
yeah, I
as to
agree.
why
Agreed.
at the earliest age people are naturally selfish, and
Yeah.
if a infant was strong enough he would kill somebody in order to eat. And
Mm,
so the fallenness of human nature and the fact that we're kind of in my mind wicked to the core is pretty empirically verifiable.
mm. I one of the best stories in the Bible. It was one of the first ones. Is that's um, the first two children of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, and I love that story. And I think it definitely captures exactly what humanity is really about, or humanity really does have within us, is that that just instinctual hatred for the ideal self that we cannot be. Is
Well,
how I would describe
that's
it.
not what, yeah, well, I mean, that's your interpretation. That's not what's revealed about it. I can understand how you want
Well,
to re establish it. Well, I
how would
mean,
you
what
interpret Cain and
happened?
Abel in that sense then?
Well, I mean, if you're going to interpret it within the scope of the biblical story,
Mm-hmm.
in the rebellion against God, in terms of disobeying His command, the mankind through his fault, through his act of rebellion, fell spiritually. I mean, they died in terms of having enmity towards God, and inevitably hatred towards everything that bears His image. So the basic problem of man is not ultimately like circumstances and all these other things, but the fact that God's his enemy naturally and that He hates him.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I suppose that I would say that people don't have as much, and that maybe this is just where we disagree. People that don't have as much natural animosity towards the idea of a god today in today's society.
No, I'm
I would
not
agree with
talking
you,
about
but
idea of
in
a God. What
general,
I'm saying is they're at enmity with the God of the universe. It's
yeah.
just
Well, and that would
that's what.
and I guess now we're at a situation where we're actually assuming that there is that God, and that someone who or
Sure,
anyone who believes
absolutely,
in a
yeah,
multitude of gods would be incorrect,
sure. But all it
or
would, what, like, can you see how in terms of what I'm assuming on that? and even the way that you feel about him would be consistent with the fact that men are at natural enmity with him, because if there is one God who created heaven and earth, then any idolatry in terms of the creation of other gods would just be consistent with that view. Now, you looking at it with supposedly the your sense that you're looking at it objectively, you say,
So,
well, that's just one person's view. There's all sorts of other views about that, and we're just all creating our own reality. But I just don't see things that way. I
well,
see us as
and I
natural idol factories.
fair enough, fair enough. I would say that because of the actual testability of like perceptional like perceptual realities that we each have, that you can very
Hmm.
easily say that because people incorporate their own realities into themselves, that it really does come down to an individual sense of what's right and wrong. I suppose because it is true that to an individual, regardless of the objective truth, a truth can be true for them. And I'm not saying that they are right in the macro sense,
Yeah,
but I am saying
everybody
to
can do
them,
what's right in their own eyes, for sure.
right? Yeah, it's
But
one of
that's, what we
one of the
normally call
bases.
that anarchy. And that's actually one of the
Well,
worst forms of government, when
I
people are
agree.
doing whatever they think is right. So,
Yeah, I agree. That's why it'll never work. I don't know why anyone brings it up. I feel like they just don't like the current society and they want to burn it down. And the best way they can describe what they feel is to say anarchy. And
well,
really,
yeah, I
anarchy
mean, but that's what
isn't really a
happens
thing
when
you can.
everybody thinks everybody. But that's what you just described, is that, like, ultimately everybody just does what they think is right, or they form those things, and
Right.
that's not really true to me, in my mind. I mean, you can
I
assert it.
agree.
I mean, you think that that's the case, but I mean, it's an opinion that one can take, but I don't believe in it.
Yeah. I think that it's interesting because there is this sort of like because we are all human as far as we're all human, and it's because of that there is a lot of shared information with each other. There's a lot of open flow of ideas between people, and a lot of groups build up their ideals together. And because of that, we end up having sort of like internet like interlocking web of different ideas that we all share as a community. But the thing about it is still though that each individual who was a part of that does still decide on a personal level what they in fact believe, unless they refer to another ideal on that topic.
Yeah,
But
everybody's still a
does come down
person.
to them.
Obviously,
Yeah,
it's not a hive mind.
right. Exactly. It's not a hive mind. So it because of that, because we are actually individuals, it does everything
Hmm.
really does kind of focal point as far as I can see on what the individual believes, and that's
Right, but
true
that
for
just doesn't
everyone.
mean, yeah, the point is that the idea that there's something that's true for me and not for you is like, I just, to me, I have more of a an objective sense of what's true. And of course, that's based on not some sort of power grab or somebody just deciding for the community this is true and everybody just needs to kind of buy into it, but that there is objective reality outside the individual to, and just as an example, the ability to define that something actually exists or not is not whether or not somebody has a deeply held conviction in their mind doesn't create reality just because they think that that's the case.
Yeah.
Just the same thing that, like even though they're not physical objects, there are moral things grounded in the character of God that I believe are true or not. And that, that's part of what the book is getting at, is the subject object, or the one and the many problem that's plagued Western philosophy for years, as well as kind of articulated even in the book of Ecclesiastes, that's wrestling with life under the sun. If you just look at things from the standpoint of the sun rising, the sun setting, life in this world, you end up with kind of incoherence and sort of meaningless in life. And I think that a lot
Hmm.
that's resolved by the creator creature distinction, when reality and ultimate movement, life and being is grounded in the creator of all things.
Yeah. I've had conversations with people who are in a specific conversation with someone who had a tough time with grips on reality, would talk about, like, we would be talking about a subject, and then there's my it's between the two of us, and then my dog's in the corner, and then we'll be talking about the subject, and then they'll kind of like stop, hesitate, and then say something like, it's kind of like this dog, and then describe the dog's place in the world. And that
Hmm.
to me is interesting, because it kind of diminishes the topic we were just talking about, because they're just describing it, trying to connect things that aren't actually connected. And you can only describe so many things as the rise and fall of the sun before you realize that you've made that point meaningless. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just because the idea stands on its own sometimes doesn't mean that there's any grander scale for that conceptualization of the world.
Yeah,
I
you
don't know if I
lost me
explained
with
that
that.
well.
I'm not
Yeah, I don't
sure.
know.
I'm not
Sorry if I
sure what you were
explained
trying to get at. Yeah, I'm not sure if
so
that was
it.
an expansion on, or kind of saying, yeah, what you just said is complete nonsense. If that's what you're trying to say, it didn't connect for me.
No, I wasn't trying to say. I would always hesitate to tell someone that what
No,
they
I,
believe is
I'm
nonsense.
okay. The whole point is that I'm okay with kind of like arguments that deal with premises and conclusions and that sort of thing. I just don't want to kind of like if the point you're making is that you're trying to deal in concretes, and I just went off into some sort of like incoherence, and for you dog
No,
was
no.
a stand-in for God, then I'm not sure if that's what you were saying, but or people that have a loss of a grip in reality. I'm not sure what you were trying to say, so it didn't
So
connect for me.
okay, so I guess I'll just I don't have any solid religious background as far as what I believe at this point. So I'll just share with you kind of where I'm at as far as individual truth, and then you can tell me what you think about it. And it's not robust. It's just very simple at the moment. I'm not, and it's not anything really. But where I'm at right now is there's kind of like like two bubbles inside of each other. There's an outside of the bubble is just unknowns, and inside the bubble is conceptual reality. That's kind of where the individual exists, and within that bubble is evidence as far as like physical evidence that you can accumulate, and that is what you generally use as a tool to communicate with other individuals. Is that
Hmm.
toolbox of what you would call reality. And then the bubble of conceptual reality is just kind of any idea. Like you could say the what is it? The Seattle Arch looks like a rainbow, and that's a cool conceptual reality. But in reality, a rainbow is a circle, or a fully connecting circle, or as far as we can see it in our perception. So that would be a conceptual reality, not an actual reality. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And
Yeah,
then
I mean,
outside of that would be unknowns.
well, to me, it's sort of like Kant's limits within or human reason with the, what is it?
Yes.
Reason within the limits of human uh, understanding. I can't remember the exact title,
Yeah.
where
Neither
the
can I.
phenomenal and the noumenal. So, the point is that philosophy ended up with essentially, Nietzsche saying, yeah, this is all kind of like at the end of the day meaningless. But the point is that in that we need to kind of just construct our own reality, because all of this is useless passion. But what I'm getting at is that from my perspective, again, you have to understand that to me that's semi-religion religious. I guess it's sort of rational in one sense, because it's I think some people have said that if you heat up a rationalist, you get sort of an enthusiast. That at the end of the day, there's sort of this sense in which you're trying to um, you're trying to grasp reality and get a sense of it. And I think in one sense the book is actually pretty good at showing sort of the madness that results when somebody says, you know what, I'm going to try and grasp something as big as comprehend reality with my mind. And the reason why it leads to madness in one sense is that there is that there's things that the creature just can't get to. And when you what I think is very clear, and I think is true in my own mind, in the way I see philosophy sort of just floundering, is that if the creator has created all things, and I believe he has, then there's no fact that's intended to stand not in relation to him. In other words, it doesn't say, the psalmist doesn't say, well, all creation probably declares the glory of God, or maybe God has manifest himself in things. It says God has manifest and made himself known in the things created, and that man's without excuse for acknowledging him. And so when man cuts himself off and says, no, I can comprehend all reality, what Kant actually got at in one sense is that no, we can't actually comprehend reality. There's these
Mhm.
things that are beyond what we can understand, and all we have is human reason. And then successive generations realize, you know what, at the end of the day, if we're stuck with human reason, we're stuck with actually being able to hardly say anything about reality, because we're stuck again trying to describe things. And at the end of the day, as the guy in the novel points out, there's certain things that just don't, you can't even box in what quality is. You can't even describe
Yep.
really what quality is, because it becomes a concept that you try and put into a logical syllogism. It's sort of like saying, I love my wife, and then you say, well, what do you mean by it? And then some evolutionist might say, well, what we're talking about in terms of by evidence standards is that we were created, we were evolved creatures, and what it was is it became really useful to propagate the species for the human mind to develop this structure within the human mind to actually to prefer this particular person over another and give more affection so that he can propagate his seed and we can have more of us after this. And
Mhm.
then the wife looks at him and says, oh honey, you're so romantic for describing it that way. At the end of the day, when you try and describe something, even at like the joy of chocolate or something like that, by the chemical processes, it actually ends up sucking all the joy out of it. And so what you end
Depends
up
on how you try to
finding is
describe
that,
it.
well, the point is that if I was just enjoying, if I was eating chocolate and somebody tried to break it down into its chemical processes, I'd be like, shut up. I'm just trying to enjoy the taste of chocolate right now. And that's the point, is trying to
Mhm.
divide things up into, logical syllogisms or evidences and things like that. Doesn't actually capture reality. And it's really easy in a controlled setting like this to have conversations about um, things about that we can control, sort of the parameters of reality. And then when you actually are faced with life and you're dealing with the hard questions of like, well, is this all meaningless? Am I just matter in motion and that sort of thing? Or even just a question of like, how do I break down into logical syllogisms the way I feel about my kids or my wife and that sort of thing? It just doesn't, some sort of logical or positive
Mhm.
scientificism doesn't really scientism or logical positivism, sorry, doesn't really cut it. It doesn't answer other important truth issues in terms of how reality coheres and how I live
Mhm.
my life.
Yeah, I think that that's why that's one of the interesting things. The overlap between the religious community and the scientific community, I would say, would be something like theater. It's both a religious person who, with their ideal set, and a scientific person with their ideal set, can both enjoy a play or enjoy a skit or enjoy some sort of artistic expression for what it is, for its own kind of artistic syllogism for how something works. Like you might not be able to accurately scientifically describe what how someone would enjoy chocolate, but you can say something along the lines. It's like dancing in a field of flowers in the middle of the day, and that could make you happy. And I don't think that that takes away from the enjoyment of chocolate. And I don't think that that's a negative really in any way. And honestly, it makes me enjoy the chocolate more if I'm enjoying it, and then someone describes their experience that way. That almost makes me like it more for whatever reason that is. Maybe I'm just
No, well,
taking
the
their
point
description
is,
and liking
in
it,
one
but
sense, the I guess if you want to call it the taxonomy or the rules of what is true in certain disciplines tr- are are useful. For instance, you don't use uh, the scientific method to determine truth in a law court. You actually have to deal with eyewitness testimony.
Hmm.
You don't go in and say, well, this person has lived 360, has lived, let's say, 36,500 days and has never committed a crime, so it's not possible, or it's very unlikely that he actually stabbed this person. So the point is that different different domains of knowledge have different ways of arriving at truth claims.
Hmm.
And that's true even in the arts, and that's true, if you're going to establish something by some rational method, there's places for that. It's the application of that, and in some cases that's kind of where Dawkins and others try and apply, I guess, what they would say evidence is, that in every case the only basis for that is um, what we consider evidence is sort of the scientific method, but that's not even true in terms of how we judge the arts, or how we even judge the statement that the only way to determine any truth claim is through the scientific method. So, the point is that there's very simplistic, I guess, if you want to call them, ways to look at the world. And a lot of people fall into those traps. All I'm saying is that it's not necessarily a religious thing to look at those arts things, because from my perspective, I don't I'm not advocating a religion. What I'm advocating is the reality of the Creator, and the reality of the Son whom He sent to redeem mankind from fallenness and sin and that sort of thing. So it's an all of life commitment. It's not just a like, hey, you have that particular way of seeing reality over in this particular sphere. To me, the fact that God exists means He encompasses all reality, and I see all of our other things as trying to deny what they naturally know about Him. And so all of these ways of trying to deal with it, including the insanity of these things, are dealing with sort of the disconnect that or that the creature has when he tries to suppress the knowledge of the Creator.
How I guess I want that's really great description. Genuinely, I can't. I'm not really good at taking the aggregate of everything you said and boiling it down to one question, but I will take one point. What do you mean when you say, God, I just lost it. No, naturally knowing something. What do you mean when you say that?
I'm not sure where I said, because I was just kind of like vamping. So,
Yeah, yeah,
in what
and it's
context
lovely
was I
stuff, and I
saying
actually,
naturally knowing?
yeah, I love. By the way, I love. Thank you for. You have a lot of knowledge, and it's really good to hear from you. Um, you were talking about that certain people naturally deny what they or they deny what they naturally know in terms
Oh,
of
I'm sorry.
like about
So
God.
for me, from my perspective, again, this is like one of those things, because it's sort of like, I don't know, it's a bad, I don't want to even use the analogy. I really do believe that the Holy Spirit awakens us to understand these things and to be made alive, but that Christ had the power to, put the power of sin to death on the cross. And so for me, I do believe what God has revealed about these things, and it's kind of hard to describe something that's a conviction that's born of somebody who's true. Where I also believe that the problem that mankind faces is that he was created in God's image, and so all of this glory and the fact that we have these conversations, and the reason why I can love and respect all of mankind, is the fact that I believe that all of them are created in the image of God. And I think that the intellectual amazement, or the amazing things that we do, are not accidental things that just occurred because everything collided in a certain way and happened in a certain way to produce this conversation. And so, to me, if since I believe that man is increated by God, that he knows whom his creator is, and so what happens is, because he's at natural enmity, he tries to suppress that, and it creates all sorts of kind of disconnections. It creates, different kinds of idolatries create different kinds of problems. And you see that with, like, you can say, well, there's plenty of people that believe in in many gods. It's like, well, how's that working out? Go try living in a Hindu caste system and come back to me and tell me how
Mhm.
that's working out. Some are Buddhist. Okay, how's that working out in Cambodia and Thailand and other kinds of things? And so yeah, there was an interesting conversation last week on Big Conversation Show between an atheist and N.T. Wright. And the atheist at least had the point to I'm trying to remember his name now.
Yeah, no problem. I was actually going to
Huh?
ask, but no, I was
No,
actually
I'm
going to ask,
trying to
but no
remember
problem.
his name. I'll try
Yeah,
and remember what it
yeah,
is.
no problem.
But a number of people have pointed out that even if they don't believe it, that the intellectual heft and the contribution of Christianity to the stability and the structures of of Western civilization have been profound. I
Agreed.
mean, the fact that we have the idea of a person and all sorts of other things, and whatever people think that that's just merely accidental, that it's just some sort of artifact of something that somebody then turns around and says, well, what a monstrous god this was that somehow created Western civilization. Not You see what I'm saying? Like, in
Hmm.
other words, these superstitious people and their ridiculous ideas somehow contributed to structures that are actually in some cases becoming unraveled because people are saying, well, none of that's true, and I'm just going to form my own basis for all these things. And so
I, s-
society's literally unraveling before us as that we go down that path.
yeah, I suppose that atheists in response to that, including myself, would be more along the lines of just because a large group of people say that this is the specific reason why we were successful doesn't mean that that was why that they were successful. There's a lot more to the realities of why Christianity has done well than just it was led by a supernatural
Yeah,
being.
no, I'm not making that as my only point. All I'm
Of
trying to
course, I'm
say
not
is
saying you
that,
are.
yeah, no, I get it. And I've heard that before. Of course, every, atheists typically won't own other atheistic kind of things in terms of the production of the societies that they produce. But the issue for me is that, again, these are all evidences. These are all kind of, if you want to say, they're kind of like supporting arguments to say, look, this is my conviction. I see it. I see it not because I ultimately don't believe it because of the evidence of the fact that, say, Western democracy is just like what everybody is striving for and wishes they had. But primarily because I know that God is who He is, and I worship Him, and I believe in Him, and I believe that I've been redeemed from a state of darkness. That Christ didn't come into the world to condemn because the world was already condemned in darkness and sin, and you see that in the kinds of things that have existed and still exist in human history. And so, to me, the consequences of that are all around us. And all I'm trying to say is that the consequences of man's rebellion, intellectually and spiritually, against God, bear different kinds of fruit.
Mm. Do you think that that there is evidence in the contrary to what the biblical account of what happened
Well, I mean,
in human
again,
history?
it depends. See, for me, what we do is we inhabit certain things, right? We inhabit what you could call worldviews. And when you inhabit a
Mm.
certain worldview, you say, this is what describes reality. All there is matter in motion, or that sort of thing. And so once I say all there is matter in motion, then I commit to certain ideas about all of reality based on that. And so I'm going to take every thought captive to that particular thing. And every evidence that I have is going to be brought captive to the idea that there is only matter and motion, and that man is ultimately the measure of all things. And so you say, well, man is ultimately a measure of all things, and there's only matter and motion. So every argument that's presented, I'm going to run through the grid of of evaluating that evidence in there. And lo and behold, I find that as I measure it, I find that there's only matter in motion, and that man is the measure of all things. Case closed.
Hmm. Um, we're at 54 minutes, so I guess we can end with, uh, because I like things to be processed. We can, if you would be willing, we both give our description, because you brought it up last time and I don't think I really got to it, but you wanted to know what I believed love was. And I tried to give it. It's a complicated thing, but I'll try to do my best, real quick, and then I'll get your perspective as well, if that's okay with you.
Okay.
Okay, so as far as where I'm at right now on the concept of love, it does feel as though love would be the expression between, at minimum, two individuals. So it would be the proper way to treat another individual, and by proper I mean the most generally positive for the grander society beyond the two of them, but also including the two of them. So
Okay.
greatest possible, outcome is for, and I know it's not perfect, but that's where I'm at right now. It'd be the proper way to treat other individuals and everyone else as a result.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Thanks.
What would be, your general answer to what is the question? What is love?
This is love, not that we loved him, but he loved us while we didn't love him. And I think that there's no greater expression of love than the God of all universe. And when you think about the immensity, if you've ever been around some large object and it's almost fierce or awe-inspiring, and to um, think of God who owed creation nothing and the creature nothing but wrath and condemnation, but sent his son to die, sent his son to be reviled, and because he loved, not that the Father was full of wrath towards us, but that he loved us and sent his son to die for us, so that we might be redeemed from the darkness that we thrust upon ourselves. So that's what I think love is.
I like it. Thank you again for being a part of the podcast. I hope that this one was a lot more, comfortable for you and
Yeah, it was
not
really
as
good.
upsetting.
I
Yeah.
appreciate the actual give and take and the discussion on
Right.
substantive things. I hope we have a chance to do it. We'll be out in California June 15th through the 28th,
Right.
so I hope to see you while we're out there.
You definitely will. And maybe we'll take the kids to another tide pooling session, so you guys have some time alone.
Awesome. All
Yep.
right. Look forward to seeing you soon. Take
All
care.
right. Take care. Love you.
All right. Love you too. Bye.